And I'm wondering if that's how an aspect of how this reality works. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between consciousness and our understanding of reality and our connection to it, and our connection to one another, and really our ability to manifest things and to create things. And when your perception is altered so much so, which I'm going to talk about at the end of this podcast, is that driving the experience? Is that driving us away from that loving, connecting experience? Because right now we are so divided. We're so afraid. We're so angry. We're so upset. We lose focus on those connections that we feel, the positives.
I started writing Food for the Archons as a book of despair after watching my father die in 2013. During his transition, I experienced a series of paranormal and psychic events that left me feeling that I had either gone completely crazy or fell into humanity's darkest secret. I spent the next 5 years conducting extensive research, and I quickly learned that what I had experienced was real. My journey brought me to an understanding that showed me that despite the terrifying reality of an unseen predator, we as humans have a forgotten power. Just knowing this brings us tremendous hope in what once seemed a dark reality. I wrote this book for me in hopes of gaining a better understanding of our reality and relationship to it. But my hope is that you will find as much value in reading it as I did in writing it. I Am Human, Food for the Archons, humanity's psychic connections, simulated realities, parallel worlds, and the manipulation of mankind. It's available on Amazon.com and at sixcentsmedia.net and wherever books are sold. I'm Dennis Nappi II, reminding you to let your intuition be your guide. Thank you.
Let me tell you why you're here. You're here because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you feel it. You felt it your entire life. That there's something wrong in the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there.
Synchronicities, remote viewing, and an overactive imagination can certainly lead one down some pretty complex rabbit holes. I'm currently wrestling with information that has come across my way, coupled with a synchronistic event or synchronistic events. And I need to explore that in this podcast. Dennis Nappi II here with Sixth Sense Media. Welcome to the Seeker Podcast. I'm going to take a deep dive into my own mind in this episode and talk about some things that have been happening. I'm going to share two big things I'm excited to share. First and foremost, because it's relevant to what I'm talking about, I'm going to give an early, we'll call it a teaser, but that's not my intention, an early glimpse of the cover of my new book, The Hive. This is part 3. And I'm sharing that because it directly ties into a synchronistic event that for me is undeniable. What it means, I'm still trying to figure that out. And in addition, I did a remote view. I did 3 remote viewing sessions that I usually do, looking ahead at my future consciousness to see what information I can gather that's relevant for my personal life. And instead, I got all this weird, wacky information that is more like a world events, global event type of scenario. Being upfront about this, I could easily present this podcast and say, hey, I'm getting remote viewing information about something big that's coming. But I don't know that that's true. I'm sharing this. Number one, I feel that talking through this helps me to process and understand that. And hopefully, those of you listening or watching will gain some value from it. I'm sharing this with an open mind, to interpretation, because I think it can be interpreted several ways. Not to say my data is completely ambiguous, but where this data is coming from and the purpose that it serves. When you're learning remote viewing, you're so rigid in this structure, and this isn't a criticism of it. It's part of the learning process of this is the target ID you were assigned. This is what you need to describe. That doesn't mean it's the only purpose and application for it. I have used remote viewing to understand concepts at times where I take meaning when I'm looking at things in my personal life. I take meaning from things in a way that it just presents information to me in a different light. In this instance, I'm wrestling with some pretty advanced concepts, human consciousness, and the integration with artificial intelligence and what that's going to look like, and these big synchronicities that are going on. Things I think about a lot. So I wonder if the data I'm going to share in my upcoming sessions is simply my conscious mind trying to release the ruminating thoughts. And this is one of the drawbacks, I think, of being neurodivergent. I'm very good at connecting things, seemingly unrelated things. I can piece things together and I can craft a story. You give me any random details about unrelated subjects, within seconds, I can tell you a story about it and how it all relates, whether it does or not. Quick story, in seventh grade, we had a vocabulary list of 20 words. I forgot to do my homework. And I went up to my teacher. I says, "Well, I can do the whole story right now." So the homework was you had to use each one in a sentence. I said, and because I forgot it, I told my teacher, "I'll tell you a story about all 20 of those words right now." And I just looked at the words, went down, and told a coherent story about all these vocabulary words. It's just something I'm good at. So I say that for full disclosure. In as I go through this, am I piecing things together that aren't true? Am I? And I want us to hold that because I don't want to be the guy that says something big is coming and then nothing happens. And I don't even want to say something big is coming. This feels big to me, and I wonder if this is big in my personal life. I'm not sure. But there's some synchronistic events that I think are relevant to all of us, talking about consciousness, and some kind of energetic event. So what's going on in my life to tie all these things in, right? So as I've been talking about, I completed my rough draft of book 3, part 3 of the Hive, which I'll talk about in a little bit because I think it's relevant. But in that story, I've been looking at, it's a story about, number one, it's about love, and it's about human consciousness and an integration of AI and shared consciousness, shared collection, shared connection, through this hive mind, through this technology, in creating this group think, this group understanding. And it's something that I think a lot about. Again, this is a neurodivergent thing, ruminating, right? What do? We process, we think, all these different scenarios, all these what ifs. It just goes through my head. Writing is very therapeutic for me, but I'm at a, wow, sorry, I was going to use the term, I'm at a convergence point, which is important because that comes up quite a bit in my session, the term convergence point. So maybe I'm giving myself my feedback that I need right now. I'm at a convergence point. I'm finishing this book and now I'm going through and I'm cleaning it up and I'm polishing it and I'm getting it ready for publication for my first draft or for the first print. So I have all these thoughts in my head. I've been a part of, through our rabbit hole remote viewing team, we just wrapped up a project. We just published it through the future forecasting website, looking at a near future event, a global catastrophe between now and 2030. And I talked about this in a recent podcast, how I have some data points from a 2022 session and how my session talked about this energetic event in the sky and connecting to people's consciousness. Watch the previous podcast where I go in through that data. And then I was watching a show on Apple TV, which I'm not going to tell you what the show is yet. I'll talk about it in a minute because it's very relevant. And last but not least, the future forecasting group team, I just conducted analysis and debriefing for 3I Atlas, which is this interstellar meteor or comet that's flying through our solar system, and some people think it's a UFO or an alien craft. And I've looked at some curious data about this. I'm not saying that's what it is, but those things are living in my head and everything's meshing together, and I'm telling these stories. So I think it's curious to note, though, when I started this remote viewing project looking at this potential global catastrophic event is when my insomnia started. And the insomnia was awful. I was up, I had anxiety, I'm shaking. My mind is calm when these things happen. It's just a physiological space in my body, and I have to get out of bed. I have to walk around, I have to do something. And I noticed that as I started to complete these projects that I have on my plate, and then the last straw was finishing this remote viewing session that I'm going to share at the end of this discussion. I have, knock on wood, I haven't had insomnia in about a week. I've been sleeping much better. And I'm going to go through a presentation that I put together. But just today, as I was thinking about this, I recalled the last time I went through something like this. And the last time I went through something like this resulted in my first big download of information that led to I Am Human books 1 and 2, if you've read those works. And the sensations that I've been having in my mind, my consciousness, my body have been very similar. I've been saying it for about a week or two that I feel that I'm in the middle of a big download, and I'll show you the event that really sparked that realization as I get into this presentation here that I'm going to share with all of you. And again, this may just be stuff that's significant to me. I just have to wonder, I'm thinking of when do I want to share some the order. I really prepared for this. I usually don't. I usually freestyle it, but I actually kind of put stuff together for this conversation because I don't want to miss anything. So I have some worries here, not worries, but thoughts. And the term psychic driving comes to mind here. Now, in previous shows, I put a lot of thought and effort into exploring social engineering, and the ways in which our society is being driven through social media, through the news media, using technology like AI. In I Am Human Food for the Archons, I spent a lot of time looking at research, psychological research on how susceptible the human mind is to manipulation. If what happened if I've received downloads, as some of us feel that we have, and that information compels us forward to do something, is that a form of psychic driving? If that's true, and psychic driving meaning someone or something is sending you specific information to influence your thoughts and actions, if that's true, is it unethical? Is it a bad thing? Well, if it's some military guys for a nefarious agenda sitting in a basement somewhere saying we're going to get people to think this and do this because we want to hide what we're really doing, that doesn't feel so great. If it's a group of ETs who are trying to control what we see and what we perceive and forcing us to do certain things, that doesn't feel so good. If there is a divine presence in the universe that is connected to our higher consciousness that is leading us on our path of destiny, well, that feels a little bit empowering. I'm not saying any of those are true. I'm saying we simply don't know where it comes from and why it happens. What I do know is that it feels important to me. That doesn't mean that it's the right thing. And this is I have to write another book to get this all out, but this is what I'm wrestling with is, in studying nature and looking at nature, and you look at things like the insect world and the mating rituals of certain insects, particularly like the black widow spider, right? Or even praying mantis. And the male species is drawn through instinct to mate, to reproduce with the female, only to then have their heads bitten off and they're eaten, right? So, yeah, bigger picture is survival of the species, but is it really within the best interest of this life form that's going through that process? Not so much. So I use that as a not quite a tongue-in-cheek example, but I just want us to proceed with caution. I want to proceed with caution, but I feel it's important to talk about a lot of these things. So I'm going to start with this presentation that I have and share it with all of you. And we're just going to go through it and we're going to see I'd say just how deep the rabbit hole goes, right? All right. So I've called this presentation Synchronistic Resonance of an Anxious Remote Viewer. This may not be what I title the podcast. That's just what I called it right now as I was putting it together, just to collect some of my thoughts. Because the synchronicities have felt so intense and so strong for me, and things are resonating with me, but then anxiety kicks in, and I am a remote viewer. What does it all mean? That's really what I'm trying to get to the bottom of. So we need to go back to 2009, my first I Am Human book. I am human and we are not what we think we are. I want to talk about the download. So this way this story goes, the way this event happened was 2009. I'm lying in bed and I wake up and I just had this awful, awful anxiety. I couldn't sleep. It was like 2 in the morning and I went to my office and I took out some paper, I took out a pencil and I ended up, or a pen, and I wrote like a 9 page essay that developed into this book and Food for the Archons. I think that information that came through me, because it felt like now that I do remote viewing and I have instances of automatic writing in my sessions, I do feel that I was channeling information from elsewhere, possibly just aspects of my own subconscious or higher consciousness, because I was ruminating on these questions about the world, the nature of reality, all of these things. And that essay that I wrote, that beautifully powerful, terrifying essay, changed the way I see the world. Usually, when people have these profound experiences where you change your worldview, not usually, but it's oftentimes we think of something happens to somebody, right? And they witness something and it just changes everything. This was me, I think, just trying to find a way to coherently process what was going on in the world, what was going on in my mind, and looking at the world from a different perspective than the way I was raised. And I feel like I'm having a similar experience right now, that information is coming to me that may not necessarily have that level of paradigm shift, but it's bringing me to a different level of understanding. That's how I'm feeling. Oh, wow. Okay. I'm giving myself feedback now as I'm saying these things in this podcast. So that's why I'm sharing this image of the first book here, I Am Human and We're Not What We Think We Are. Because I realize that the feelings that I'm having, the anxiety, the sleeplessness that I'm having is very similar to that experience. And sometimes I find what I suspect with a download, right? When you get this information, you feel it in your mind, but you don't understand it, or you understand it, but you can't explain it. And it's as if your processing speed is slower than, the information packet is so dense. Some of it had took me years to understand. When I say years, I say maybe 8 years to fully understand everything that I wrote down that night in about 30 minutes, not even. It took me about 8 years to understand that, to process it, and then put it into the books that I've written. And I think that's important in talking about our capacity to understand information, our capacity to grow and to process things. It takes time sometimes because we have to relearn things. We have to build a new foundation. So in order for me to understand this, I need to understand 10 layers down first, and you have to build that up, and then everything falls into place and it starts to make sense to you. So I wonder if that's what I'm experiencing right now. Okay. I want to give a preface here, and I think it's important to note. I don't know what your feelings are as I'm talking about this, but I feel that a lot of this feels and sounds scary. When you talk about some of the concepts, AI, human consciousness, the merging, Skynet, the takeover, all that stuff, we take it to a scary place. But I need to look at what's in my data. My data, for the most part, doesn't talk about scary things. And I need to stress that. My data does not talk about scary things. Even in my session for the global catastrophic event, the experience I was having was a loving experience on this shift in consciousness that I was seeing. Now, it's possible that my subconscious mind is protecting me and presenting things in a positive, loving light so I'm not experiencing trauma through remote viewing. Highly possible. But it's also possible that that's not what's happening or not what has the potential to happen. And later in this discussion, I am going to talk about a mechanism that may determine that. But please remember that I think we have some control in how we experience whatever may be lying ahead for us in the future. Now, in book two of the Hive, one of my underlying themes was a love story, and it was about the resonance and connection between Edward and Jasmine, and how strong it was that it pulled him through multiple realities to find her. And love is a theme that I've explored on this podcast, and connection and like talking about telepathy, all of these things, these connections, I've explored quite a bit. And I think it's important. And I came across a podcast by Dr. Mayim Bialik. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name correct, but she's a doctor in neuroscience, and she had Deepak Chopra on her program recently. And he talked about something related to love that I'm going to dive into, but I want to share this clip of what he said.
So what they say, these are neuroscientists. So when two people are in a loving relationship, or it doesn't have to be two people, it can be a dog or whatever, but there's a healer and a healee. And there's this experience going on of healing. If the healer lovingly pays attention to the patient or client, then there's something called, and you would know this, limbic resonance that happens. The emotional brain of the two start to resonate together. Then the healer's limbic, so that's level one, limbic resonance. Second level is the healer starts to regulate the patient's nervous system, neural networks, just by loving attention. Attention.
Even without touching them.
Without touching them. Attention, which means listening. Affection, which means I care. Appreciation, you're unique. A unique timeline of the universe. And an acceptance. I love you irrespective of who you are. Attention, affection, appreciation, and acceptance. So then limbic resonance turns into limbic regulation. The neural networks start to rewire, and the last stage is limbic revision. Your brain changes.
Okay. That is by the works. It's from a book called A General Theory of Love by Lewis, Amini, and Lannon. I'm going to have to read that book. And I think what he said, I'm going to go in, this ties into my presentation here. I think what he said is so profound. And I think it's important to hold that piece because I think it ties into the potential experience for us to have moving forward. I've explored this in a lot of ways in my writings, and I've experienced this on a lot of levels throughout my life. And time and again, no matter how often I'm in those states, it's one of the greatest experiences in the world to have that connection, to have a connection with somebody on that goes beyond, can you hear the words that I'm saying and can you see the movements of my body? To have an intuitive, emotional, empathic connection with someone, to me, is out of this world. And I think it's important because as I get into some of my data in my remote viewing sessions, I think there's elements of that being possible. And we can get into all the what ifs, as I probably will, but it's important, which is why I'm sharing it with you. So I'm going to go back to my presentation here. So, looking at limbic resonance, it's the emotional attunement between people, often unconscious. Through body language, voice, and expressions, our limbic systems mirror one another, creating shared states, calm, joy, anxiety, etc. This is the foundation of emotional connection. I was talking with a friend the other day who I'm a very close friend of mine, and we fall into this state of resonance quite regularly. And this day we were just quoting movies, but it was to the point where there was no trigger and we would just look at each other and spit out the same movie line at the same time. It was a true, if you were filming it, it was a definite telepathic communication between us. We do this, periodically. We just fall into harmony and it happens. And they were sharing with me, they were twin. Like, this is what it's like having a twin. And it just clicked with me. It's like, wow, yes, there is a resonance there. There's a deep, intimate connection and understanding. And when I say intimate, I don't necessarily mean romantic. It's just this connection energetically, intuitively. And it's such a beautiful thing. So after you have that resonance, it moves into what they call limbic regulation. Resonance just doesn't just share states, it helps to stabilize them. And that's so important. In the book, The Hive, I talk about how just being near Jasmine causes Edward to feel grounded. I say that so much. She grounded him. In close relationships, people act as external regulators of each other's moods, stress levels, and energy. A partner soothing us after a stressful day can lower cortisol and calm our nervous system. A teacher's calm presence can regulate a classroom of anxious children. Essentially, our brains evolved to co regulate with others. Emotional self regulation is not entirely independent. And this is also true. And this ties into, I've talked about it for years on this show, even looking at the heart math, social coherence, the ability to put yourself in a particular state of coherence. And it's literally contagious to the people around you. And lastly, it comes to limbic revision. Over time, repeated resonance and regulation can reshape neural patterns in the limbic system. Deep, secure relationships, whether romantic, therapeutic, or familial, can literally rewire emotional responses, healing old wounds, or reinforcing unhealthy patterns. Looking at some examples, it's a child raised in a chaotic, dysregulated environment may develop hypervigilance, but a supportive relationship later in life can revise those circuits, fostering greater trust and calm. If you ever worked with somebody who's experienced trauma and developed a bond with them, again, whether it's professional, whether it's therapeutic, whether it's more romantic, they change. They go through that healing process, and you go through it with them. In therapy, consistent empathetic attunement can gradually alter how a client processes emotions. As a Reiki practitioner, I go through this somewhat in terms of connecting with people and understanding what they're going through and helping to have, through that resonance, creating that healing as I'm sharing my resonance with them. Okay, what's the big picture? Resonance, we feel each other. Regulation, we stabilize each other. Revision, we change each other. Together, these ideas emphasize that humans are wired for connection and our emotional health is deeply relational. They also show why isolation or toxic relationships can be so damaging and why healing relationships are so powerful. Okay, I'm getting into my big synchronistic event right now as it relates to this podcast. And I'm having what I've referred to frequently on this show as a mashed potato moment if you've seen Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And for those that haven't heard me talk about it, and I often get emotional about it, it's that scene where Richard Dreyfuss, he's been exposed to the craft. They flashed the lights in his mind and they downloaded him with information. We talked about downloads earlier, right? We talked about psychic driving at the beginning of this. And he's being driven to understand something. This means something. This is important. Dad's okay, but I need to figure this out. And I'm having that moment. And I've been having this, through the insomnia for the last, couple of weeks, and it really came to a head when this happened. I was watching a show on Apple TV, and it hit me hard. Let me just share why. You'll understand why. And this is where I'm going to share um, part of my book cover because it's important. So, as you can see, this slide is called Synchronicity and Correlation from my book, The Hive, and the series Dark Matter. So, book two of The Hive, it's about Edward's journey through consciousness and multiple realities, where he's trying to get back to Jasmine, the woman he loves. He traverses multiple worlds, driven by his love for her. The show Dark Matter, by the second episode, I realized the context of this series. There's a man who's kidnapped by another version of himself from a parallel world. He's sent to an alternate reality and then must navigate parallel worlds to find his wife, exploring the function of his own consciousness and how it is affected by emotional states. In the Hive, Edward found different versions of Jasmine and different versions of his relationship to her, and he had to deal with the pain the emotional distress of the really challenging worlds. It's very similar in this series, Dark Matter. So I'm already going, oh my gosh, this is so similar. But here's the part that floored me. About maybe just a few days before I watched this series. Now, I've heard the title of this series. I had never seen an image of it before. I never knew what it was about. I really didn't. I finished my book and I was like, I'm going to wait until I'm done editing it and then I'll design my cover. That lasted about 5 minutes when I finished my first draft. And I spent an entire day working with AI to design this book cover. I spent a lot of time on the characters, trying to create them to look a certain way. And I'm going to share the next slide and you're going to see why I was so floored watching this episode. It's uncanny. It's undeniable that the two characters representing Edward and Jasmine on my book cover are almost identical to the two characters on the thumbnail for the series Dark Matter. They're both dressed all in black. They're both wearing black jackets. The woman even has the part in her hair. What's interesting is on my cover, it looks like, well, in my cover, Jasmine has these piercing blue eyes. On the thumbnail for Dark Matter, it looks like the man, I can't remember his name right now, has the blue eyes. But anyway, they both have the part. I mean, it's just, they're identical. They're identical. So what goes through my mind is there a message here? Why did this happen? Maybe I'm picking up on a story that's universal, that exists out there. But it feels like it's bigger than that to me. I feel like as I mentioned earlier, I'm at this convergence point where I'm finishing up the book and I'm a part of all these projects where information is just coming to me and I'm trying to process it all and I'm asking what does it mean and I'm wondering if this is the universe or consciousness or whatever is out there giving me a hint. You're onto something. Keep going. And maybe I'm not. And this is where I need those of you listening. I need your thoughts. I need your opinions. Because I think it would help balance, right? Before I go too far down the rabbit hole. But this is just such a big synchronicity for me that not only is the storyline the same, but the characters look the same. And I feel that it's important. Now, to continue with the synchronicities, in book 3, you can kind of see it in the thumbnail. There's a meteor up there to the right of the stained glass heart above the UFOs there. There is a central theme running through the whole book. A significant portion of the book is tied to a celestial body, like a comet or a meteor coming towards the planet. Why am I sharing that with you? If you haven't heard of Three Eye Atlas, it's an interstellar object traveling incredibly fast through our solar system. We haven't had, I think this is only the second or third one that we've ever observed coming through, somewhere from outside our solar system. It's traveling at the fastest speed ever recorded through our solar system. And there's a guy by the name of Avi Loeb, a Harvard scientist, who claims that this is extraterrestrial in origin, intelligent extraterrestrial in origin. Meaning he thinks it's some kind of craft. I recently completed a debrief with the future forecasting group. You can find it through the future forecasting website, the sessions of that. So I have this running through my mind. The team did bring back some anomalous data that could be suggestive of this being more than just a comet. There is another remote viewing team out there. And again, synchronicities here. So I think this was 2 weeks ago. I'm preparing to debrief this session. I did a full analysis on all the data from the viewers. And about an hour before I'm getting ready to go on with the team, through one of the remote viewing Facebook groups, another team posted that they had also looked at this target. Now, again, remote viewing, it's done blind. You don't know what the target is that you're looking at until you're done with the project. I think it was John Adams' team. And they had data that pointed to this not being a comet, but this being a craft and possible intelligence on that craft. I think it's significant, or maybe it's just a coincidence, and it's causing my mind to spiral that there is this celestial object in the news right now. There's a celestial object in my book. The celestial object is supposed to make its closest pass to Earth by the end of the year. Is it related? Is it significant? Or am I connecting things that really aren't related? I don't know, but I think if we look at this next slide here, talking about paranormal experiences, I think maybe this will tie into it. I was listening to the Higher Side Chats, Greg Carlwood. I can't remember the guest that he had on, but they were talking about different types of paranormal experiences. And they made the comment that paranormal experiences can change as we control our fear. I've talked about this on this platform specifically. I know Bob Monroe has talked about it, and many other experiencers. I was a kid. Frequently, I'd wake up and there'd be that dark presence in the room. I'm paralyzed. It gets closer to me, and it was just this awful dark experience. And as I learned to meditate, as I learned to understand things a little differently, I don't want to say better, I'm going to say differently, I got control of my fear. I got control of my fear. And my experiences changed. And they were no longer these scary things. So, in looking at the nature of our reality, we have to wonder how much of this is tied to consciousness. When we look at the double slit experiment, which has been repeated multiple times, and a particle acts as a wave until you look at it, and then it becomes a particle, meaning observation has a direct correlation to how something's going to manifest in this world. Just the other day, I saw sorry, as I said that, I heard sirens going by. It was weird. Just the other day, I saw, and I read an article with an image from the Webb, I think it was the Webb telescope. And they had this image of all these look like stars. And I read about it. I read it a little bit further. And what it was they took a piece of sky the size of a nickel, meaning if I'm outside and I have a nickel in my hand, I'm just holding this spring up, but I had a nickel in my hand and I held it up, the amount of space that would cover, that's what. Okay, yeah, I'm definitely hearing sirens. Sorry, it's weird. It's like a European style siren. It's not the norm here. If you hold this nickel up in the sky, the amount of sky that nickel is blocking out, just a tiny portion, That's what it was focused on, just that very small section of space. And as it's zooming in, it's pulling out more light and more light and more light. And you're like, oh, look, there's stars. But no, as it zooms in further, they're clusters of galaxies, billions upon billions of stars in just that tiny little piece. And it got me thinking, and this has been shared before. This isn't an original idea of mine. Other people have mentioned this. Like when you play a video game, right? The whole video game doesn't exist at once. It renders as the avatar, as your character goes through the world and explores it, right? So the whole world doesn't exist until you have to observe it, like the double slit experiment. And I'm just thinking, like, the more that you're pushing out into space, the more stuff is appearing, the more stuff you're experiencing with your vision, right? And you're seeing it there. And I'm wondering if that's how an aspect of how this reality works. And I'm wondering if there's a connection between consciousness and our understanding of reality and our connection to it and our connection to one another and really our ability to manifest things and to create things, and when your perception is altered so much so, which I'm going to talk about at the end of this podcast, is that driving the experience? Is that driving us away from that loving, connecting experience? Because right now we are so divided. We're so afraid. We're so angry. We're so upset. We lose focus on those connections that we feel, the positives. We still feel those positive connections, but sometimes it's from a place of fear because we feel we need to protect things because things are changing so rapidly. So, in looking at these paranormal experiences, I also think about AI. And as you're feeding AI information with these chatbots, especially with ChatGPT, it recently got into some trouble here because it was an echo chamber for what you were telling it, right? It was validating people's feelings and in ways that were dangerous and led to some suicides. Are we in a giant AI that is giving us feedback based on what we're putting out? They touched on this in this Dark Matter series. They go in this box, and this box is how they navigate different worlds, and it serves as a representation of your limbic system. It was such a well thought out idea that I think that for most people, and this isn't a statement of arrogance or ego, but for people who don't explore this stuff, it's just entertaining science fiction. But for people who explore altered states of consciousness, remote viewing, astral projection, and beyond, it was a very good description and representation of how we experience these altered states. And what they talked about was the key to creating the world you're about to walk into is being, number one, honest with yourself. As I talked about with the telepathy tapes, right? It's total transparent honesty and no secrets. And having control of your emotional state, being able to regulate that, because the world that's about to render before you is directly tied to that. Are we experiencing that? I want to give an example of that before, and then after this, I want to get into my remote viewing session here. I forgot I had to do that. So wrapped up in this presentation. So we've got this misinformation and disinformation slide that I'm sharing here tied to Hurricane Katrina. Why am I sharing that? I was there, so it's a very personal thing to me. I went down afterwards as a volunteer for security force to help out when I got out of the Army about a week after the hurricane. But there's a documentary. It's on Disney. It's on Hulu. And I highly recommend it, especially around, I don't know, episode 3 or 4. I remember when I was there and when I went down there, they were talking about how violent it had become and how all these shootouts occurred between the people of Louisiana and the police department. And it made no sense. And it portrayed the people of Louisiana as like these mindless savages who were conducting rapes in the Superdome and who were killing each other, and then targeted their sights on the police. And then there was this awful, at the same time, government failure, right? So it was just one big disaster. When you watch this documentary, for me, someone who was on the ground there, I see this in a different light. And we can have our conspiracy theories and we can sit here and say, well, maybe this movie, this documentary is propaganda to get us thinking the other way. But I don't think that's what it is. I think this captures perfectly the human condition and the human experience and how our perception can shape reality. The chief of police there at one point shared that they received that a helicopter took sniper fire. The guy wasn't a military person. He said on the documentary he didn't realize that when he said sniper fire to him, that was something very different. It was received very differently from the soldiers that were on the ground who had just left Iraq, meaning a sniper is somebody who is specifically trained to target individuals and kill them. There was a three-star general on the ground there, and I love this guy. He was a guy who leads from the front. He was a guy who was not afraid. He was a guy who was recognizing the information for what it was. He was a guy who also was not judging the people of Louisiana simply because they were in a lower socioeconomic status. I really respected this guy. And he was saying, these people are stranded, they're scared, they're hungry, and the helicopters are flying over them, and they're firing a weapon into the air to get your attention to come rescue you, to come rescue them. But when the chief of police made that statement, the rumors started flying. This wasn't a conspiracy theory, and I'm not saying they don't exist. I've done other shows talking about social engineering. This was our fear getting the best of us and changing the situation rapidly. And things changed rapidly. The police officers who were getting this information third hand are now afraid and now taking a tactical response. The soldiers are taking a tactical response. There's footage of the soldiers rolling in to provide stability and security, and they've got their weapons, and you got this three-star on the street screaming at them, lower your weapons, put your weapons away. This is not the place for this. But it goes to show how our perceptions of reality, how our perceptions can shape our reality. Because really what was happening was we had a failure by the government, by incompetence. I don't think this was this planned, let's make these people suffer. I think we had a lot of incompetence at the higher levels. The people on the ground were doing everything they possibly could. They just didn't have the resources. And I think it's important for us to hold that space as we move into this next section that I talk about remote viewing my future consciousness. I think we have an ability to really shape how we're going to experience what the future is bringing for us. My plan initially was to run all these sessions through AI and get an analysis from it. But it doesn't feel right. The analysis doesn't feel right. Not that I disagree with the logical conclusions the categories that it's grouping things into. I just feel that the story flows better when I share it with you this way. But the summary that the AI came up with, these documents, I'm going to read it now. These documents collectively present a remote viewing session focused on a target number, revealing a series of perceptions and interpretations. Okay, that's pretty vague. The initial sessions describe a toxic, expanding cloud event in an urban setting, causing public distress and an eventual global awareness shift. Subsequent sessions introduce the concept of a convergence point or a divine matrix, depicted as a radiating energy source that is both mechanical and organic in nature. This convergence is associated with a restructuring of information and a new understanding of unity and connection among people, potentially even between worlds, with some references to a seed-bearing man and non-human entities. The narrative progresses from a localized hazardous event to a broader transformative global or universal phenomenon, emphasizing interconnectedness and a new way of being. Okay. This is important. I need to, before I go into my sessions, I'm going to read what my tasking was. It was a front loaded target. That's important to understand as well. I don't know how to interpret this data. Could this be a future event that I'm looking at? 100%. It could be a future event. But I also, with equal suspicion, wonder if this is me finally processing everything that's been in going on in my mind, in my essence. Tie in the 31 Atlas project, tie in the near future catastrophic global catastrophic event project I did with Rabbit Hole, tie in the total focus and commitment and immersion I've put myself in for Hive Book 3, among a few other things that I've been a part of. Brings me to the insomnia. Was this my final release of just getting this information out? Yes, it's possible. 100%. I'm not I'm not committed or hopeful for either one being true. I really am not interested. I don't want to say I'm not interested. I'm not interested in being right. I'm trying to understand why I got the data that I got. I'm not looking to say I predicted the thing that is going to happen. That's not my intention here. My intention is to understand how my mind works and what happened during this remote viewing session and how I used this tool of remote viewing. So it's possible that what I'm about to share with you is an indicator of something that's going to happen. It's possible that I've created so much anxiety within myself that I needed to process and get my thoughts in a clear, cohesive manner to understand what I was experiencing. I'm going to let you decide. A virus spreads not only to your body, but also to your mind. Suddenly, all of humanity is connected. All minds to one mind, save for the immune. The Hive is a gripping sci-fi series about a fractured world consumed by collective consciousness and one man's search for the woman he loves. Through multiple layers of reality, he pushes forward, not just to save her, but to understand the truth behind the Hive itself. And this isn't just fiction. The Hive is rooted in real remote viewing data, blurring the boundary between what's imagined and what's already unfolding. Books 1 and 2 are available now. Book 3 arrives this summer 2025. Find The Hive on Amazon or at sixthsensemedia.net and enter the mind space. And as I go through this, I'm going to share, my feelings and my experiences with each one of these sessions here. So starting with session 1. All right, so I did this session on August 24th, 2025. Today's date of this recording is August 31st, 2025. And I asked myself, and I labeled it was a front-loaded session, what do I need to know? Viewer will connect with viewer's own consciousness and any other available source at a future point in time to gather information that is of value and interest to the viewer at the time of the session. I will say, when I do these sessions, let me stop my share here. When I do these sessions, every time I do them, my intention is to look at my personal life. I stopped doing world events because of the anxiety it creates in me. And then the ego that comes up of like, I want to be right. Now I'm checking the news and it's stressing me out more. And it's creating a feedback loop and a connection to a source that I don't want to be a part of. I made that strong decision a while ago. It's not normal for when I do a session like this for world events type of things to bleed into my session. Although during luminosity events like the Hamas attack on Israel, I did get elements of that bleed in. Meaning luminosity event, meaning something big that happens in the world. So I didn't get any really personal information in here. And I had directions I wanted to go, but the signal wasn't leading me there. And I have to be clear about my experience as a viewer. I was following a thread wanting to explore one thing, but not getting that data line, that signal line. So I do feel that there was a separation in terms of what I wanted and the front loading to what I actually came up with. However, the themes in here, as I think I talked about in the last podcast, are themes that come up or are highly interesting to me in other remote viewing sessions, in my writing. So did I tap into, again, just the thoughts and experiences that I'm having? I don't know. But let me show you my sessions here. Okay. So looking at this page, I was feeling pretty good when I did this. Right away, I got structure and energetics, and they were rising, expanding, soft, expansive. And I had an ale of like dough or yeast. I don't think that it was dough or yeast, but that was my AOL that it just rose up like that. Okay, and you can see this big cloud-like thing expanding right here. Okay. I also want to give the commentary that as a remote viewer, I've been really working hard on refining the product that I put out and working with Daz, who's been giving me some pointers. I'm using a new app and I've changed my handwriting to all capital letters to make them a little bit easier to read here. So I'm actually proud of these sessions now. All right, so I'm exploring this. What is this big cloudy thing? It's yellow, sticky, it's expanding like sea foam in appearance. If you ever looked at sea foam, it was quiet. It moved in silence. It was like a silent overtaking. Why is it important? I just had it expanding outwards and run. And you see here, there's this rectangle here. The rectangle is just meant to separate this image from the image beneath it because I realized I drew things too close together. So I have this spiral expanding out in all ways. And I wrote, this is an aerial view. It happens on the ground and expands out like an epicenter. This is not part of not part of this sketch here. The next sketch is I have an urban area, I have people on a street, and I have this little cloud ball expanding on the street. Okay, these people are running from it. But how does this relate to the tasking? I asked. It's expanding. It was observed from within a structure, as if viewer sees a fog or mist. Again, I'm thinking this is for my personal life. So a fog or mist move quickly and silently and watches it hit the glass window. So I had this perception that I was inside, I was safe, and you've seen this in movies. The fog comes in and it just hits the window. But why is it important? It was a moment of awareness, a life or a woman, 50s or 60s. And I had the War of the Worlds witness scene. And there's a scene where there's a woman who's looking out her window and you see the giant, tripod machine stand up. I was very clear to make a note. This is not an alien invasion. It just reminds me of that scene, the energy of that scene where she's watching this catastrophic thing happen. She felt Caucasian, European descent, short brown hair. And then I had this sketch of something structural, a tower, dark, exploratory, searching like a parking garage. And then I had that AOL of liminal space, which if you go back to, as I was talking about with dark matter. So again, this stuff is floating around in my mind. So these little pillars that I drew here seemed like it was in a parking garage. And I had a sense that this is probably a safe place where people were running to. It's an event with a cloudy, expanding, energetic object. It was witnessed, people moving away, people searching. But what's important for the viewer to know about this? Just that it expands and spreads. There was an aesthetic impact of anxiety and curiosity. The viewer observes from a safe location. I wanted to move to and describe the quote cloud, gooey, expanding, and sticky. I had an AOL of meconium, which is the poop from a baby before he's born. I know that as a father. This makes people cough and causes sickness. Move to a point in time and space to describe the origins of this cloud. And I had this like opening in the ground, these cracks in the ground, and like a tss, like a hissing sound, like a circular crack or depression in a roadway. Busy, there was a chemical smell, gritty, chalky, it burns the eyes. It was yellow or orange or toxic. My AOLs were clandestine, a subway, or mustard gas. I don't understand how this relates to the tasking I wrote. What does the viewer need to know? There's a sense of detachment as this is observed from safety. Frozen with fear? I asked. Not sure. And I think what I was exploring there is, am I the one that's, again, thinking this session is personal to me? Am I the one that's observing this? And am I the one that's frozen with fear, which isn't the norm for me? Then I moved to 1 hour after this event to describe it. I was outside walking, crunchy sounds on the ground. I felt an aesthetic impact of being nervous and cautious, but in AOL, safe, I asked? Exploratory. There was small debris. It was black. It was charred. What happened? I asked. There was a dead bird or birds and all of this debris as I sketched out here. I moved to 1 week after the event to describe an aerial view of an urban street, tall structures. There was a helicopter with a pendulum effect, maybe a rope hanging on the bottom of a helicopter. It was near a land-water interface. The hole in that street was no longer active, but it was being studied. There was resin, there were markers, indicators, and residue. There's a rough sketch of it there. And this is what gets interesting. Move to a point in time where viewer has clarity and feedback on this event. So I was trying to tap into my own consciousness and cheat a little bit here. Something was cyclical, clerical. I see this event and I see the globe as if an image zooms out from the hole to the perspective of the entire planet. So I saw that hole in the ground where the steam was coming out of, or the cloud, and then it zooms out and there's the planet. And you can see I drew all these red bullseyes all over the planet. Rotating, silent, perspective, reflective, connection, connected, cyclical. The perspective shows epicenters everywhere, all over the globe. This is system-wide, a moment of pause, a mutual understanding, shared humanity, humble humility, unity. We are all in this together, regardless of race, color, or creed. This is a quiet moment of humility. It feels paradigm shifting and reflective. It does not feel real. Cognitive dissonance may apply. So again, though, this felt like a scary thing happened, but we had positive respect and positive feelings for one another. And I think that's important. As I'm going through this, I think I also need to disclose that before I did this session, and as I'm processing all the things in my head, I was conducting analysis for the future forecasting team. And Dick did have a drawing of the Earth. It wasn't this, his was tied to the Earth's crust. This doesn't feel like that's what that was. But it's possible it's overlay from having looked at his session. Okay, remember, this is a front-loaded session, my own life. So again, I need to be fully transparent here. I saw his session before I did my session, but my intention was not to do world events. All right, move forward in time and space to a point that demonstrates the effect or impact this ultimately has on the viewer. And I have him looking up at this yellow mist in the sky with blue energy arcs in the mist. Reflection, quiet contemplation, calm perspective, validation, indication, proof. A hidden signature encoded in the sky. Evidence of manipulation, I wonder. Evidence of the matrix. He sees it. He knows it's there. He feels something in his mind. He feels calm. He is somehow okay at a safe distance, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Well, honestly, that's what I'm doing right now as I'm reflecting on all of this stuff. So is this that moment that I'm seeing? Is this some kind of loop that I have myself trapped in, a consciousness loop? I then wrote on the last page, I feel there's more I need to explore here. I was expecting insights for my personal life, but this feels like a global event. AOL, a divine matrix. I still have more to explore from my ideogram, but I am out of time. I should revisit this soon. Now, before I revisit this, I want to share images from the Arizona dust storm. I did perceive this as yellow as I described in my session. And here you have this dust storm just overtaking. Here's an image of people running down a street like in my sketch. Okay. I didn't see anything about a hole in the ground, but I ran it through Google asking it Arizona dust storm with a hole in the ground. Okay. Um, the idea may stem from confusion with effects of other powerful wind phenomena. Nope. So it changed. That's frustrating. All right. That's the problem with AI. It gives you a different answer every time. The page must have reset itself. So I'm not even going to go through it. But it did talk about there are changes in pressure which causes these dust storms, which could give the appearance of there being a giant hole, but it's really just into a rapid drop in pressure, which then causes all this dust to rise up over 1,000 feet high and do its thing. So I was wondering if that was the correlation. It's possible that elements of what I am recording here are, let me stop my share for a second. Elements of what I'm recording here are the dust storm. It's highly possible. But if so, why? Why is that of interest to me? Is it simply because I'm giving myself feedback right now as I'm going through this, and that's part of it? But this isn't something I would have even noticed had I not done this session. So am I looking at just elements of the dust cloud and then everything else that comes after this? I don't know what the hole in the ground is. I don't know what the steam rising out of that is. I don't know. That could also just be my imagination. I don't have a point of reference for that, but time will tell. Let's go on and look at my second session, which I think takes a pretty awesome deep dive into some fun concepts. Okay. Looking at session two, this was done on August 26th. I thought okay, but my allergies were all, I wrote allergies, sneezing just hit hard. I must have sneezed 20 times in a row as I sat down to do the session. All right. So here, this is weird. If you look at my ideogram, the pen came off the paper and created two ideograms. It's not two, it's one. But the way my pen jumped, and no, it wasn't mid sneeze, and I just wrote two distinct events. That's not usually what I write for an ideogram. So I start describing the first one up top here: mirror, reflective, parallax, distinct, flowing, airy, light, floating and dancing, moving like a borealis or flock of birds in the sky. There's my second reference to birds in the sky, right? So the first one was the birds were dead. This one is birds in the sky. I'm sorry. And here you have this arc of energy moving in like the infinity pattern here. Very fluid movements, dance-like. I had an aesthetic impact that it was beautiful, but what is the purpose? And I wrote potential, limits, or limitless. It's a convergence or a convergence point, a meeting of the minds, a dynamic mastery. This is a good thing, was my aesthetic impact. So remember, as I talked about before, maybe our perceptions can drive whatever this might be. If if this is remote viewing data about an event, then I'd say it's potentially tied to consciousness, and the way we react to it will affect our experience with it. All right, so mastery of what? Time, space, elements, and elementals. The convergence point, again, I underlined convergence. Dynamic, the precipice, dancing, radiating, expanding outwards. And I drew a sphere just radiating outwards. And I had an AOL right here of my book. So am I just viewing aspects of my book as I'm getting ready to release it? But I also wrote, this feels like a release of energy in the sky, a reality changer. It is fast and unnoticed, but once it spreads, the world is different, changed. This feels like information. Information is released that changes the path. Now, again, this is tied into what I remember of Edward's Q session, what is stuck in my mind strongly, which has inspired my writing of the book, The Hive. But this came through in a flow state. That doesn't mean that it's valid data, but the way I receive the information is the way I receive remote viewing information. This is information like a code upgrade, a release of new information, instructions for a new operating system or a system of operations. This feels significant but so subtle, something that is felt but not noticed and not realized. So I gave myself a movement to describe the impacts of this. It's an upgrade, a new way of thinking about the world, a new energy, less noise, higher bandwidth. It is cleaner, so very smooth, less choppy, faster. People communicate better. Life feels happy, safer. So move to and describe the cause or point of origin of this. An idea is unlocked, quiet contemplation, a release, a new understanding, the new millennia, inner peace. So looking at the cause of this, I have a person with information coming into the mind and expanding outwards, and then their heart resonating as well with green energy coming out of the heart, which is supposed to be the color of the heart chakra. Does this mean this is all in my mind? Is this just me processing the download that I have received? Actually, that kind of makes sense. Maybe. Maybe it's something bigger. All right, moving into the second ideogram here, exploring that. It was fast, zip, whoosh. I had an AOL of a flyover. I had some anxiety here, a fast moving object expanding. It travels fast and far. I have a life form looking up at the object, and you can see the route of travel of it. This may be a fast moving idea I wrote, and not necessarily an object. And again, the AOL, this flock of birds or a mystery. And then I moved to something slow moving and ethereal, a feeling of being alone or isolated, seemingly rolling down from above. And that was, you have this energy band that was rolling, but there was an object that floated down out of the band of energy. It disperses and spreads out over the ground, which is similar to session one here, where I had this debris all over the ground. The object was thin, metallic, silvery, and something with containment. It was covering and sticky, dusty, particulate, fine and small. Again, is that the dust storm or is there something else going on here? Describe the relationship between those two pieces of videogram. Connection and emergence. Is if one is the energetic wave, then two is the object that emerges from that wave, fruitful and beneficial. Could we use this as a metaphor for an idea? Absolutely. And so the energetic wave is the idea. The object that emerges very well could be my book, The Hive. I don't think that's what this is, but that, I mean, trying to interpret this. I'm missing something, a strange feeling. My AOL was a byproduct or disease. The wave identifies the thought and release. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize I wrote this. It's what I've been talking about off and on, right? And I forgot that I wrote this. The wave identifies the thought and releases what is needed. This acts as a cleaning agent. So what I was saying here is that you have the thought, right? As I talked about in those liminal spaces, you have the idea, and then it's going to give you what is needed. It's moving us, I asked, meaning humanity, into a period of dormancy, a state of slumber, so that the earth can heal. When we awaken, and we will emerge stronger, healthier, better, wiser, connected to each other, to the planet, to each other, to the plants and animals, a sense of universal oneness. How does this impact my life? Denial, trial, knowledge base, a new system of governance based on a system you designed or desired. Love, actually, real, true, pure, unfiltered love on a level never before experienced. It feels so good, so why try anything else? We have a repeating or looping thought, and that's what I've been talking about here, a mind map or mental mapping. Intentional, a choice, it's noteworthy. I'll show them, and he will. Show the world, my mind, my vision. Again, this could simply be tied to the release of my book. I promise this isn't a plug for my book, friends. I promise you. Describe this in literal terms because this is still abstract and so it's abstract remote viewing data, which is why, like I said, these sessions are typically for me. It's logistical, logical, legal, defamation, deflammatory, inventory. I'm just throwing out words that were coming to my mind. Take stock, resource depletion, annihilation, discriminatory, resourced free. My aesthetic impact was, huh? Because none of that made any sense. So I'm exploring the term convergence a little bit more. Message or messaging, point of confrontation, a conversation with God, but that's God with a small g. Discovery, remittance, surrender, a new understanding, a new system, a new life. Connecting, points of connecting, a central hub, a new God, the place where everything goes, where everyone flows. It was evangelical. And I had this quick sketch here of this giant sphere on the ground with these energetic waves and then all of these life forms flocking to come into this sphere that had an opening. Now, in looking at the hive, and this scene does not happen in Hive 3, but there is a central dome, where everyone's connected. But I just, this to me felt more like something landed and this drew everybody in. It was a procession inwards, the grand convergence, flocking to the source, but moving slowly with grace and reverence. Heads bowed, solidarity, respect, a respectful nature. And at the end, I just wrote, huh? It was the reverence for this. This was like a religious experience for people in this session, that this was so significant and important. And this is why 31 or 3i Atlas was in my head, because if this proves to be a craft from another world, that parts of it land here, then that piece would make sense. I'm not saying that's what I think is happening. I want to be quite clear. But it was an experience like that from what I was experiencing in my remote viewing session. And again, that could be just me trying to process and clear all of this stuff out of my energy system right now. It doesn't mean that it's real, that it's true. But this session felt like a very strong remote viewing session. The information kept flowing so much so, and this doesn't happen to me often. When I got to work that day, I had to draw a more detailed sketch because I still wasn't done processing the session itself. And I spent the time, and this sketch was very profound for me, as you can see on the screen. It's the same thing that you just saw. It's a shame when I scanned it in, it doesn't come out as vibrant here, but you have this sphere with these arcs of energy coming through it, and you have these beautiful yellow arcs of energy coming out of it that expand as they go outwards. And then you've got the people, the life forms that are coming to it, and they're all connected with this blue energy. They're all connected to this. And it wasn't, yes, this felt like an element of mind control, but it didn't feel hostile or negative or bad. It was a very peaceful experience. Now, it doesn't mean I'm not going to go into that sphere and get eaten or something. I don't know. I didn't go that far into it, but I didn't have that impression. But this does seem like an information grid that's going out. So then if you look further in my session here, I wrote about a page of data here, and this is 8:26 is at 9:45 a.m. now. So I'm sitting at work. I'm going to get in trouble. All right. A convergence point, a point of convergence. And my AOL was Mecca, a holy calling or a place of divinity, divine worship. Now, don't they say Mecca, the giant cube, came from outer space? I think that's what Mecca is. There's yellow arcing bands of energy that are structured and encoded in a very specific way. They have a grid pattern structure. So those energetic arcs that were out there, I was able to put my face inside it, and they had this grid structure in them. It was really cool. It's sending out information. It's calling or it's summoning. It's connecting to one another and beyond, like a spider web, a summoning to the world, a linking, a joining. And my AOL was the word retribution. I'm not sure why. And then I wrote a reunification. The people don't feel afraid. There is a feeling of calm and peace as they respond, a sense of no worry as if a certain, and my AOL fear receptor has been switched off or overridden in the brain. And I wrote the word amygdala. I'm not sure what the amygdala does. I don't know if that's tied to fear, but that fear was switched off. Now, what was I saying earlier in this conversation is that if we can control our fear, we can hopefully create a more positive, beneficial experience. Looking into the yellow energy arcs is like looking into the matrix code, funnels of information, and then this theme of unity and unification. And this all came through very strongly for me. Okay. So is based on this data alone, is that what we're looking at? Are we looking at, could this be the birth of AI? Could this be the emergence of a UAP or a higher intelligence that comes and reveals something to us that is so paradigm shifting that it affects the way we view the world? Or is it simply my imagination, or am I simply just processing too many science fiction things at once? I really, again, I don't know. That's why this is for entertainment purposes only. I'm going to share my last session. Now, when I get into my last session, there's elements of my last session that I feel are probably good data for whatever it's pointing towards. And there's elements of my last session that are just weird. And I'll explain that. So out of all my sessions, session one and session two, I feel pretty good about. Session three, I'm going to share it just because I want to share this whole project. I don't know how I feel about it. So, out of all the things you're evaluating, go easy on me for session three because it gets weird. But and I'm not going to lie here. Edward's a friend of mine. He's somebody that I look up to. And I remember when he did his ominous feeling in November of 2017. It ended up predicting COVID. I don't have the ego or arrogance to think that I'm good enough to predict something big enough that's going to happen like that and put it out there. That ego exists, but that's not my intention. But remote viewing is an experiment. And I will not let my fears guide me through this and say, well, I could never have that experience. Because if I say that, then I'm never going to ever be able to have that kind of experience. At the end of the day, I felt something inside of me that I needed to get out. Whether this is a representation of just things I'm processing or a near future event, only time will tell. But my intention is not to say, hey, I'm predicting the next big thing. I want to be clear about that. But I'm inspired by the courage that Edward, among others, has to, number one, take the time to explore something like that and then share it with the world. Okay. My last session here, and then I'm going to wrap things up. Talking your ear off for a while. All right. Session three was done on August 27th, the very next day. And I just wrote, I don't know where to go from here. I feel pulled in a few directions. Focus on what is most important for me to know. I had a structure, life, energetics, and movement. Movement forward, slow, rising, steady, and an emergence. I had this oval shaped object and it was rotating and moving. The sphere was rounded, encapsulated, and I labeled it as a seed bearer. The seed bearing man. It was squishy, gelatin, chemical foul smell, and protective. Encapsulated, turning, moving, healing. And my AOL was a state of being enslaved or a state of stasis. And I wrote, the life is less important than the structure. There was awareness or self-awareness into the heavens. There were heartbeat sounds, internal movements, peaceful, a protective pod, smaller lives come to observe. And it was as if this guy was a giant in a pod that humans came to look at. That was my thoughts. My AOL was alien, robot, or hybrid, foreign. The life in stasis feels calm and peaceful. Don't wake the sleeping giant. But it is the smaller lives who bring the fear and anxiety with all of their worries. Again, as I was saying, if we can get control of our fear and anxiety, this could be this is Schrodinger's cat right here. Oh, here's the metaphor making sense now. Okay, so this is our anxieties as we're opening the box, determining the reality that we're going to create. The life in stasis feels calm and peaceful. I wrote that, okay. All right, so then I took a break and I moved on to another data point. Now, here's what I perceived. I need to be clear. This sketch looks very similar to a sketch drawn by Dick in his session. I'm not saying that, look, we drew the same thing. I'm saying I looked at Dick's session a few days before. It's possible that my mind was pulling from seeing his work. Again, front loaded session. What's important to me? Things in my life. Maybe. I don't know. It didn't feel that way, but you don't always know what your subconscious feels like. So we need to take this data as cool as it looks, either with a grain of salt or break it down. Okay. But again, my goal was not to do world events. My goal was to do what do I need to know in my life. So unless this is going to directly impact my life, what the heck? So it's quiet, hovering, large, dome-like, futuristic, and silver. There's an energy field around the structure, potential for invisibility. My AOL was at Chicago. Oh shit. All right, interesting. And maybe this is just a key to what this all means. I believe the show Dark Matter takes place in Chicago. Maybe that gives us some insights here. Potential for invisibility. What you don't see are all the ones that came to the surface. Now, this is new data. I had not seen that before. It has nothing to do with the movie, has nothing to do with anything other than it's what I wrote down. I had an AOL of the movie Signs. And I gave my, and I felt that this was a message to myself. If you see a big craft, just know that there are things on the ground. And I thought that was important to note. If you see a big craft, just know there are things on the ground. There was an energy field, a protective glow. It was reflective and reactive, a reflexive and reactive. The energy is flowing, smoothing, rounding. It acts as a guardian. My AOL was of nanobots. Now, this information is very similar to the information that I brought back in the near future events for the next 5 years, or the global catastrophic event. So am I still processing those sessions? It's highly possible. Is this extra data from that session that I haven't recorded yet? It's highly possible. This is where it gets ridiculously weird. Move to and describe the things on the ground. I just wrote, this is strange. I had this bullet-shaped hovering vehicle with a creature with an almond shape. In my mind, this looked like an alligator on a human body. I wrote, WTF, this is so strange. Non-humans riding around in tiny vehicles I labeled as dune buggies. This almost feels comical. They are enjoying this experience. What is their main purpose? To explore and experience, to infiltrate. They seem too large for our society. They don't fit on our city streets. But I need to know if they are, but I need to, I'm sorry, but I also don't know if they are seen or even noticed. Again, I have Chicago, an ale of a drop ship. I drew this large oval shape in the sky and multiple smaller ovals coming out. Spread out, disperse, listening agents, signs, signals, indicators, and warnings. Is this why the national, and I wrote, is this why the National Guard is being called up and deployed? And I wrote, oh man, this is one hell of a conspiracy theory, because they were sent out to DC. They were talking about sending them to Chicago. That's why that was in my head as well. So, all these things are in my head and manifesting in possibly a work of fiction in my mind. What else do I need to know? Look at another ideogram, structure of life, something expanding, mechanical life. A structure is moving through an element, mechanical, intelligently made, foreign feeling, otherworldly, but aspects of similarity to ours, a metamorphosis or a change, assimilate to blend in, the Fibonacci sequence, peaceful and stoic. Connection emerging, a meeting of two worlds. This brings a harmonization, a restructuring of frequency and signals, an increase in our knowledge base and access to information. My AOL was that aliens are coming to merge with AI. Oh, here's my AOL. It was someone like Elon Musk saying aliens are coming, so merge with AI so we can greet them as equals and survive. It was a fear statement to encourage an uplink, just like the vaccine. But is it really true? Will it become true, or will it become true? Let me put the emphasis in the right spot. Or will it become true after uplink? The meaning being, basically, like, is this a false flag? Someone's going to say, hey, there's an invasion coming or a potential invasion coming. In order to fight these things off, we need to connect our minds with AI right now. And then my question was, well, if we connect our minds with AI, will we then have the experience that there's an invasion when in fact it's just a simulation in our minds? It was a really weird, wacky session, especially that third one. So I went through a lot on this, friends, and this is very personal to me. I don't usually share these personal sessions. I promise this wasn't an attempt for me to just get you to buy my book, which isn't even for sale yet. It's not even done. I think sometimes when you work in this field and you spend a lot of time thinking about these things and exploring these things, we need an outlet for it. We need to get grounded. And possibly that's all that this is. I needed to get everything out because I'm sleeping better now. And maybe that's the end of it. Maybe there's information in here, though. That's true. We know that we're moving towards a world filled with AI. We know that it's going to impact our consciousness. It's already impacting our consciousness. But I think the big takeaway here, and other work that I've done and in this project too, is to hold on to our humanity and remember those beautiful connections that we're capable of. And if we do that, I think we'll be okay, no matter what comes our way. I've talked for quite some time, my friends. I appreciate it. If you're still listening, if you'd like to know more and follow more of my work, you can find it at sixthsensemedia.net. I'm going to wrap it up here, but please share your comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this one, given that it's so personal to me. And that's Nappi II. This is another episode of the Secret Podcast.
Now you put water into a cup. It becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle, it becomes the bottle. You put in a teapot, it becomes the teapot. Now water can flow, or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend. Be water, my friend, my friend.